presents the Premium Oddscast, your home for the best fight picks, bets, analysis, and statistics, hosted by mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Kuhn, and myself, MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. Get an inside track from the experts as part of MMAOddsbreaker.com's premium betting service. Welcome everyone to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, and I'll be joined today by professional MMA line setter Nick Kalikas and MMA statistics guru and recent author of Fightnomics, Kuhn, to break down this Saturday's UFC 169 pay-per-view event. Now, if you're new to our show, just remember that for the first fight on the card, it'll be just myself and Nick breaking down the fights from top to bottom, and then for fights with relevant data, usually the main card bouts where there's a lot of fight time to evaluate, Kuhn will come in with all the fight metric statistics and offer his statistical analysis on the fights to offer a little extra. So before we get into everything, let's bring you up to speed on our totals from UFC on Fox 10 last weekend. Our premium plays went 1-2 overall. We won a straight bet on Jeremy Stephens, but our underdog pick on Adriano Martins failed to deliver, and then Mike Rhodes killed the first leg of our parlay with Eddie Wineland. Overall, we lost 3.33 units with the premium plays, but thankfully our free bet parlay on the overs for the Sullivan Rhodes and Caceres Pettis bouts cashed, and that eased the sting if you mix that in with your plays. Now we're looking to get back to our winning ways with UFC 169, which takes place this Saturday, February 1st from the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey, and the main card will air live on pay-per-view. There are 12 fights in total for this event. Now the first fight on the UFC 169 preliminary card is a welterweight matchup featuring Ultimate Fighter 16 veteran Neil Magny, who comes in with an 8-4 record, taking on debuting Russian Ghassan Umalatov, who is 14-2-1 overall. Now Nick, where'd you open this line, and how's the public kind of shifted things?
Umalatov minus 165 to come back on Magny plus 125. That was my opener. Over 5 dimes right now, Umalatov's minus 185, so a little bit of more action coming in his way. It's a tough fight. It's a close fight because Magny's definitely going to be one of the best fighters Umalatov's ever faced in his career. Magny's an extremely well-rounded, I guess you could say, prospect. I mean, he's still young, 26 years old or so, and he's put together well. Obviously, he's got the Ultimate Fighter experience. He has a following with the fans as far as UFC diehards. They know who Magny is, and he gets a little bit of respect. Getting into Umalatov, though, the guy's a pretty solid fighter in his own right. I mean, I said that he doesn't have the most impressive resume as far as competition goes, but it's solid, especially for over there in the European scene. He was actually a star in the Russia Fight Night organization, so that's one thing you got to look at, because that's a very solid league as far as European standards go as well. As far as Umalatov's striking goes, he moves well. He's got decent footwork and head movement. He likes to throw his lead left hook a lot, and sometimes even lands with a nice uppercut. So overall on the feet, he's solid. He throws with a lot of power. He's got decent technique in most cases as well, so he's fun to watch on the feet. His grappling is also pretty solid, though. He's got overall a pretty solid wrestling base, decent takedowns. He's got some sneaky leg trips and even throws. But the problem is with him, I have seen, obviously, in footage, he can be put on his back and he can be controlled a little bit. But his takedown defense does continue to improve. You can tell he's been really working on it, and it's not easy to get to the floor. So this guy has the ability to keep the fight standing. He's got decent footwork, like I said, decent power on the feet, decent striking, decent grappling to go along with it. So matching up with Magny is actually pretty good. I think both these guys are both well-rounded, and they're going to give each other a good fight. I mean, looking over again at Magny, his striking's pretty solid. He's one of those long, rangy type of strikers. He's got decent footwork as well. What bothers me about Magny is he doesn't really engage too much. He tends to be a little bit too tentative for my liking on the feet. He needs to throw with a little bit more power. But he is okay on the feet. I mean, he can definitely sneak up on you. And his grappling, overall, Magny's grappling continues to improve. You know, he's got kind of a solid wrestling base, decent takedown defense overall, but he can, again, be put on his back and controlled against solid wrestlers. So, again, both these guys, well-rounded. They match up pretty well together. I just think Umalatov's a little bit better at this stage, and I think he's just going to outpower and control and dictate the pace of this fight. So Magny's probably going to lose on the cards. I expect it to go the distance. If there is going to be a finish here, though, I believe it might be Umalatov finding his spot either by submission or maybe even a TKO stoppage. But more likely, it's going to hit the cards, and I expect a competitive decision with Umalatov coming through.
Looking at this fight, I think that Umalatov is just a little bit more aggressive than Magny. Magny he has the length, but he doesn't really use it very well. When he's fighting, it's like he's sparring. He doesn't really try to go for the finish or even try to land these big power strikes. He's usually just, tossing out a bit of a feeler jab, and he's still got a way to go. His striking is still a little rudimentary to me. He doesn't really have a great chin. Mike Ricci blasted him to advance to the finals of the show, both with a left hook just in the straight stand-up, and then finished him off with an elbow in the clinch. So I don't really trust Magny's chin, and I don't think Magny has that great of submission defense either, as you saw against Sergio Moraes. Saying he just got dominated in that fight. So the only thing that Magny's really got going for him is he trains out of a really good gym. He's still young, 26 to Umalatov's 31, and he trains in elevation, so he's got that. Maybe this fight goes a little longer than he might be able to take over late. Now Umalatov, he trains with some good guys. When Ali Bagautinov is in Russia, he trains there, and he also trains with the Bellator heavyweight champ Vitaly Minakov. So he works with some solid guys. He's not the most technical fighter. He's hard-nosed. He's more of a swarming, sprawling type of stand-up. It's not technical by any means, but when he smells blood, he does really go forward and throw some big looping power. But he's not really a finisher. He pursues takedowns from the clinch, and he usually does get to top position, but he's a little sloppy. So as Nick mentioned, he's going to lose scramble sometimes. He gets on his back, and while he's comfortable off of his back, he's not very good at getting back to his feet. So that is a bit of a concern, and he does get swept every once in a while. I really don't think there's a whole lot of upside with Umalatov, but overall he should be a little bit better here than Magny. And I think even though Umalatov does go to decision often, a lot of his fights in Russia actually only had 2 5-minute rounds, so he had a lot of 10-minute fights. He's only ever gone to 15 minutes, I think, once in his career. So that could be a concern, making his United States debut. So I'm picking Umalatov tentatively, but not confidently, even though I don't think Magny's that good of a fighter overall either. So now moving on to another really interesting battle between debuting UFC lightweights. We have Tony Martin, who comes in with a 7-0 record, taking on Rashid Magomedov, who is 15-1 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Magomedov minus 210, Martin plus 160. That was my opening number. Since that time, again, over $5 right now, Magomedov is minus 250. So early support coming in on the Russian. I'm not really surprised. I expect the line to increase a little bit. Magomedov has so much hype coming behind him, coming into this fight behind him from really M1 Global. He was a welterweight champion there. Again, he's just one of these European prospects that has hype around him. He's got solid striking skills. That's highlights his game really overall. He's basically known as a sniper, a great striker, one of these Russian-based fighters that has good footwork. He's kind of a methodical striker. He has pinpoint accuracy at times, good power, he's fast, he's got good chopping leg kicks, a big right hand. And as far as grappling goes, in most cases he's got pretty solid takedown defense, and he's able to scramble back up to his feet. I think the grappling realm is definitely Magomedov's weakness still at this point, but he's been drilling, he's been getting better in those areas as well. And man, he's so fun to watch on the feet. That's definitely his best attribute. So a lot of big things supposedly on their way for Magomedov. I just think he has a hard test in Martin. Martin's also making his debut. I should say this about Magomedov as well. He was the 170-pound champion at M1 Global, and now he is dropping to lightweight to make his UFC debut. So this is going to be his first time at 155, I believe. And as far as Martin goes, this is a guy that, again, was actually fighting higher up in weight classes. He was fighting at 170. I believe he might even fought higher than that at one point, but at least he was fighting at 170. He did make the drop for a couple fights to 155. And he's a very solid prospect as well. A lot of people don't really know much about Martin, but he's another one of these guys. He's tall, he's lanky, he's a long, rangy striker on the feet, but he's not really a striking-based fighter. He's more of a grappling-based fighter. He's got strong wrestling, really strong wrestling, underrated wrestling. And the funny thing is about him, he's one of these just natural athletes. He's been training with Brock Larson. So that's what's really developed his ground game, because we all know, I mean, Larson, the former UFC vet, the best part and best attribute of his game was that grinding style. And he's really rubbed off on Martin because Martin has that similar style. But not just that. I think Martin on the feet is capable of hanging in there and making things interesting as well because, again, he has good footwork. He's tall, rangy for, his striking, and he leads with a nice jab, has good boxing for the weight class as well, and for his short time in MMA. So a lot of upside, I think, to Martin here. And what makes me kind of like him more than Magomedov in this matchup is his wrestling. I believe, again, if you look at Magomedov, he has been taken down in the past. He has been controlled in fights. And I think Martin's going to have the stylistic matchup that's going to be a nightmare for Magomedov. I think Martin's going to end up pushing the pace, coming forward a little bit, eventually hitting takedowns, controlling, looking for ground and pound, looking to pass, maybe looking for that submission, and exploiting Magomedov's weakness. So Martin, again, an underdog for a reason, but I do believe that everybody's kind of underestimating him a little bit, and I think he is probably going to come through in this fight. So two highly touted prospects. You have basically one in Magomedov, that's your typical striker, and you have Martin, which is the typical grappler. So grappler versus striker, I just have to go with Martin here. I mean, there's way too much value, I think, on the underdog at this spot, and I'm going to just go ahead and pick him straight out as well. I think he's going to surprise everybody and pull off the upset win over a solid Russian making his debut.
And something that stands out to me, Magomedov, he has a lot of talent. I mean, he was the M1 welterweight champion for a reason, and he went the distance in both of his fights for the title, or his most two recent ones. So cardio is not going to be an issue whatsoever for him. He actually does get stronger as the fight goes on, but there's things that are red flags for me. He is a bit of a slow starter. He's dropped early rounds in fights, and he's not the most active guy, and he hasn't fought in over a year. So his last fight was actually November of 2012. He might have had to wait out a period in his M1 contract. I'm not exactly sure why he's been out so long, but that is a bit of a concern. But Magomedov is a talented guy. He does get stronger, and I don't see him as a huge finisher. He has decent striking. I mean, obviously the high kicks are solid. He does have a good right hand, but he doesn't really get a lot of finishes, and that's something that he might really need here, especially if he drops some early rounds to Martin, because I think Martin is really promising. Despite being just 24 years old and starting his career in fighting in 2011, he's really taken off. I mean, the guy beat the next Anderson Silva, Felipe Nover, earlier last year. So that was a huge win for him, and that kind of burst him onto the scene a little bit. But Martin's promising. He's really aggressive. He pursues takedowns early. He dives on submissions. He's not afraid to go for them and give up position. And I think he's got decent power in his stand-up. He's got a good left hook, and he's beaten middleweights in the beginning of his career. So and he has experience at lightweight already. So just a whole bunch of different factors I think are going against the Russian here, especially first fight on American soil, I believe, and then the first fight dropping down to lightweight, hasn't fought in over a year, and as a slow starter against this guy that's just so hungry. I think it's a recipe for an upset. So I'm picking Martin as well. Now moving on, we have a very interesting battle in the middleweight division featuring Clint Hester, who is 9-3 overall, taking on Andy Enns, who is unbeaten at 8-0. So Nick, where'd you open this one, and what are the odds kind of telling us?
Well, Hester opens -245 to come back on Enns +175. Some steady movement actually back and forth on this fight. It did tighten up a little bit. Right now, looking over at the line at 5 dimes, Hester's -185 +160. So a little bit more support coming in on the dog, and I do believe that they're probably onto something as far as betting goes on this fight. It's a dog or pass situation, and that's coming from a guy that bet Hester in his last fight. So I have supported Hester. I do see the improvements that he's made in his game since the Ultimate Fighter, and I know he's working hard to keep on improving his game overall. But this is going to be a tough test with Enns, because Enns is one of these solid fighters overall that's hard to finish. I mean, he's more known for his grappling base, of course. He was also a former Ultimate Fighter contestant. He lost by decision to Uriah Hall on the show there in Uriah Hall's actual first fight. But that being said, I mean, beyond that, Enz has actually a pretty solid resume, considering outside of the UFC, that is. He's from Alaska, so he's spotted on the Alaskan scene there. And he's pretty solid. I mean, he's another one of these guys that's very tall, so he's a lanky striker. His stand-up's obviously not his strong point, but it is decent. He leads with a long left jab, and he leads with it pretty often. He has okay boxing, but he's just a little bit slow. He has decent clinch work as well. But grappling, again, is Enz's best attribute for sure. He's a submission-based fighter. He doesn't really have the best wrestling. He struggles at times to get the fight to the floor. But once he's on the ground, he does look to finish. He has decent ground and pound, and a decent sub-game. He loves snatching your neck and looking for chokes. So overall, Enz has a lot of upside to him because of his toughness, because of his grappling ability, because of his size. But he is still very raw, I think. He has a lot of positive attributes. And he's young. He's only 22 years old, so you know he's going to improve and get better. Hester, on the other hand, I mean, he's still at prospect level. I guess he's only 27 years old. He is improving, like I said. The best attribute for Hester is definitely his stand-up. I mean, the guy's got 7 knockouts. His clinch game is pretty solid. I mean, he's got dangerous elbows, knee attacks. Of course, his boxing's always improving, getting better. He's got decent reach. He's 6'2" as well, so he's got a lot of good positive attributes. He's a solid athlete. He's been working on his wrestling and his takedown defense a lot, but that's probably still his weakness. And any fighter that can get Hester down, control him on the ground, and maybe look for a sub is probably going to be Hester's kryptonite. So this is exactly the kind of fighter that Enz is. He's going to look to push the pace on Hester, try to get the fight to the floor, and really work his ground game. Now, again, the improvement level of Hester, I'm expecting to be even better. He's going to come here pretty solid. I think he's going to be able to stuff a lot of the takedowns. He's going to be able to keep things on the feet, and he's probably going to be able to catch and land a little bit more often on Enz than vice versa. So I'm going to lean Hester here. It's not a very confident lean because I do think it's probably a dog or pass situation as far as betting goes. But as far as strictly pick goes, I do give the slight edge to Hester. I just think he's a little bit more battle-tested at this point. I think his improvement has shown me enough that he should be able more times than not to keep this thing up. And if he does, again, he'll do more damage on the feet. So not a confident pick, but I am going to lean towards Hester in this spot.
And I think that Hester is a pretty solid guy overall. I mean, he is 2-0 in the UFC for a reason, and he has solid boxing. But I think one of the things that concerns me a little bit with Hester is he does pace himself a little bit too much almost, where he's not the most active striker. He likes to counter, and he does have the really big power when he connects, but sometimes he's just not throwing enough strikes to really wow the judges. So that is a concern for me, but he does move well. He's relatively light on his feet, and he has very good striking defense. And while his ground game is definitely his biggest liability, I think his ground game is only bad if he actually winds up on his back, and his takedown defense is actually getting half decent. So I'm not sure that Enz is going to be able to take advantage of that by actually getting him on the ground. Now, you look at Enz, he's only 22 years old, so he's got the whole world ahead of him. He is more of a submission-based fighter, and even though he trained out of Arizona and has had all of his fights, or Alaska, he moved to Arizona for the MMA lab, so I think that that's going to be a huge help for him. He's training with some really elite guys right now, and that is an opportunity for him to really take it to the next level. He is the only guy that actually made it to a decision against Uriah Hall when they were on the Ultimate Fighter in the fight to get to the house, and in that fight, man, he blocked a kick and broke his arm in the first round, and he just kept fighting and made it a compelling fight. Got Uriah Hall down a couple times, and opened the eyes of Dana White and them, but overall ended up losing the decision. He is absolutely tough as nails, ton of heart, and I think he does have really good conditioning, and that might be his other chance to potentially get in this fight. Is Hester does not have amazing conditioning. He does slow down, although he still keeps his power. He's not the best conditioned guy, so if Enz can really push the pace and make Hester work, maybe he can take over late. And while Enz doesn't have great, double legs and regular takedowns, in the clinch it's not bad. He can turn the corner a little bit. He can get some trips. So that'll be interesting to see if he can actually pull that off against Hester. I'm not sure he will, but I think at least at this point in their careers, I'm picking Hester. Maybe if they fight again in like 2 or 3 years, Enz could take over. but at least right now, I think this is Dave Clint Hester's fight to lose. Now, moving on, we have a really intriguing 155-pound lightweight matchup between Al Iaquinta, who's 7-2-1 overall, taking on the UFC newcomer Kevin Lee, who is 7-0. So, Nick, what's the Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, Iaquinta opens up -210, the comeback on Lee +160. Man, I love this fight because you have, again, two solid prospects. I mean, Iaquinta, Ultimate Fighter vet, so he's a mainstay, I guess, for most fans right now in the UFC. He's looked pretty good, but Lee, he's one of these other highly touted prospects. He's young. He's only 21 years old, just coming into the UFC, and I think he's eventually going to have success. It's a tough debut in Iaquinta because they match up so well together, but I'll get right into Lee. I mean, striking-wise, on the feet, he's got pretty good boxing. He's got some speed, power, good footwork and movement. I mean, especially for being kind of so young and raw in his career, he definitely mixes up everything well. He's got nice hand combos. He's got good knees in the clinch. And what impresses me about Lee is he listens to his training camp and his coaches. You could tell when he's in the cage, he's getting advice, and he really tries to implement and do what his corner says. So that's something to kind of take notice of as well. I think that's important. A lot of times these young fighters, you kind of yell out instructions to them and they just ignore you completely and kind of stick to what they want to do. But Lee, you could definitely see him learning constantly, improving his game, listening again to his coaches. Now, the grappling attribute of his game is probably the best. So he's another one of these guys that are coming into the UFC with a collegiate wrestling background. He's got outstanding takedowns, and control, good ground and pound, good takedown defense. But again, it's another one of these spots that against other good takedown artists or wrestlers, he can be put on his back and controlled a little bit. But he does scramble well, and he's got solid BJJ overall. And he's another one of these guys, though. I mean, outside of the UFC, of course, you can't get a lot of big wins at times, but this is one guy that's fought some solid competition on his resume. So for some of the smaller shows and smaller circuits or whatever, he's actually stepped it up as much as he possibly could and fought the best competition he could outside of the UFC, to a certain extent at least. So that's impressive about Lee as well. And they're giving him Iaquinta, which obviously the UFC definitely has respect for Iaquinta. They know what he's capable of. So they're thinking Lee can come in here and hang with him. And I agree with them. I do again think it's going to be a competitive fight because Iaquinta, he's one of these guys that on the feet, of course, I think his best attributes is hands and his boxing. He's very smart. He likes to push the pace, come forward, and he mixes things up. He goes to the body well with his punches. He does throw decent kicks into his attack as well on the feet. And he does have that solid wrestling base where if he wants to, he can take the fight to the floor. His takedown defense in most cases is pretty solid. You can't get the guy to the floor. So he has that grappling background with Sarah and those guys that he's solid in every aspect of the game. Now, he is beatable again. He can be put on his back like a lot of these guys can be, but overall, it's a tough task to get Iaquinta down and control him on the ground. So more times than not, this fight should play out where they neutralize each other out as far as wrestling and grappling goes, and it should play out on the feet. If that is the case, I have to give the slight edge to Iaquinta because I believe he's more developed and further along in his career right now, and he has a little bit of the better striking and the striking edge. But again, I expect Lee to hang in there with him even on the feet, and it'll be a competitive fight. Back and forth we go. I expect these guys to scramble, take each other down a little bit. It's just going to be a fun fight. I think it's actually a fight of the night candidate, and really looking forward to it. I do think, however, Lee's probably going to be on the wrong side of a decision here. I think Iaquinta is going to do enough to edge him out, so I'm going to pick Iaquinta here. But it's another spot that it's going to be hard to lay the juice in a fight like this on Iaquinta. I think it's almost another dog or pass situation, and again, looking forward to this fight. And
some of the things that stand out for me with Lee, I mean, the guy's got really good amateur experience. He actually was 10-0 as an amateur before switching over to the professional full-time. And he was actually, the guy's very intelligent. He was a full-time student getting a degree in biomedical science 1 semester away from graduating when he got the call from UFC, and he actually took this semester off to really focus on his training. So I'm very interested to see how he's actually able to compete when he's a full-time fighter now, or at least he's given it a shot to be a full-time fighter when he wasn't a full-time fighter and he was still putting on such solid performances anyway. And the guy does have decent power. He's got some nice kicks and knees, and he aggressively pursues the finish. He's got a really solid little guillotine choke that he's actually used in his last 2 fights, where his opponents, they just leave their neck exposed for a second, and he just dives on it. So I'm very interested to see, because Iaquinta, that might be his biggest flaw, is he is a little bit vulnerable to submissions. Those are his 2 professional losses were both submissions. So I'm interested to see if Iaquinta does shoot in for that takedown to try to steal around. If he leaves his neck out there, maybe Lee, latches on and takes it home with him. But overall, though, Iaquinta, very technical. He's got some solid boxing. He's much more polished than Lee, but I mean, he's been fighting longer too, and trained out of just a terrific gym with Sarah Longo. I mean, those guys are teaching him just great stuff, and he's working with some really great training partners. So iron sharpening iron over there, and he's got good power, but Iaquinta is a little more reserved in using it. He doesn't go gung-ho like he used to, like where the fight against Michael Chiesa, where he was just throwing the big bombs, and that left him vulnerable to the takedown and eventually the submission. So he holds back a little bit more now, as you saw in the Ryan Couture fight, a fight that he probably should have been able to get a finish, but he had a workman-like decision with his striking. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this go to the judges, but Iaquinta should be able to outwork Lee, at least at this stage in their career. I think Lee has a tremendous upside, but again, UFC debut against a really tough guy in Iaquinta, who I think the UFC really likes. So this is a very winnable fight for Iaquinta. So I think he wins probably by decision. So moving on, we have a middleweight contest featuring Nick Catone, who is 9-4 overall, taking on former Bama middleweight champion Tom Watson. So, Nick, where'd you open this one, and how's the public kind of shifted things?
Watson minus 170, the comeback on Catone plus 130. That was my opening number. Since I opened, a little bit more action coming in on Watson. I mean, he did get to over 2-1 at some point. Right now, over 5 dimes. Watson is minus 185, the comeback on Catone plus 160. So more people thinking Watson's going to come in and get the W here. I mean, looking at Catone's last couple performances, I can understand why. I guess first I got to get into what kind of matchup it is, and it's your typical grappler versus striker matchup again. I mean, Watson is your striker, and Catone is obviously your grappler, wrestling-based fighter. So, again, looking at why Watson is a favorite over Catone, it's mainly because if you look at Catone's performances last couple fights, I mean, he dropped down to welterweight, fought T.J. Walderberger, got rocked and submitted by Walderberger. That's not necessarily a good thing. He didn't look that good at welterweight. I mean, the weight cut it was harsh for him. You could definitely tell that. So not a good cut and not a good idea to move to 170. He's bouncing back up to 185 now. So I think he's going to be a little bit healthier, a little bit better for him at 185 for sure. And we're going to see a better version of Catone at 185. But unfortunately, before Walderberger as well, he did suffer that TKO doctor stoppage due to a cut to Camozzi as well. So he was doing actually pretty well in that fight, but still he lost. So he's coming off back-to-back losses. Catone at one time was a promising middleweight prospect, and of course suffering a couple losses like this, especially one at welterweight, is going to drop your stock drastically. So that's what's going on here. And Watson, on the other hand, again, he is that striking-based fighter. He's been in a few wars lately. I think a little bit more respect coming in on Watson because he's faced some solid grapplers, kept it on the feet in most cases. Against Litis, obviously, that's how he lost the fight. But, I mean, he has shown improvement in his takedown defense for a striker. So that's why I think people are supporting Watson. They think he could maintain it on the feet, and he's probably going to catch Catone's chin, which has been a little bit questionable more recently as well, for sure. So I can see that. I understand that as well. And Watson does continue to improve his takedown defense in his overall game, and he does have a nasty clinch game. He's got a lot of power on the feet. He's just very dangerous. So Catone's going to definitely have to take this fight to the ground, take it to the ground often, look to control, even look to maybe get in position to sub Watson. Obviously, that's not going to be an easy task. I mean, Watson has been subbed in the past before, but Litis couldn't even sub him in his last fight. So I don't think it's going to be easy to do that, but Catone can probably control and dictate where this fight goes. Now, the danger here is, at some point, I mean, look at the Camozzi fight, Catone does take damage, and there is that concern that he could possibly get caught again, cut, maybe stopped. Watson does have that nasty power. Watson's takedown defense is getting a little bit better, as I stated. So I'm going to slightly lean towards Watson in this fight because it's his fight really to win or lose. I think if he could keep off his back, he should win this fight more times than not. But again, I mean, fighting a grappler like Catone, that's not going to be an easy task. So slight lean towards Watson, but another one of these, I know people don't want to hear, but it's another one of these dog or pass situations probably. I don't think it's a good idea to lay a juice on a fighter like Watson right now, with his kryptonite being a grappler, and that's exactly what you're facing in Catone. So that's why I'm saying that. But where they stand right now, you have to give, I think, the little bit of an edge to Watson.
Catone, he's moving back up to middleweight after that just atrocious failed experiment at 170 pounds. He does have solid wrestling. His conditioning's not great. And as you brought up, he sometimes just finds ways to lose fights. The Chris Camozzi fight in particular, where he was working the wrestling and then he just ate an elbow, and then the fight got doctor stoppage and Camozzi wins. So there's just these fluky, goofy ways sometimes that he loses fights that he potentially should win. So he's very unreliable sometimes. And with Watson, while he doesn't have the best takedown defense, part of what Catone needs to do to get the fight to the ground is usually initiate a clinch. And I think Tom Watson might have one of the best clinches in MMA, at least in terms of dirty boxing and dishing out punishment. As you saw in the Stanislav Netkov fight, and even the Litas fight, every time that he gets it in the clinch, he just dishes out punishment, whether it's elbows, dirty boxing with punches, short knees. He is just constantly attacking, and it's scary sometimes. Like, he just creates gashes, and man, he's very violent when he gets the fight to the clinch. I think he's actually better in the clinch than he is when he's at a distance on the feet, where he is decent with distance. He has pretty solid power overall. He's got decent kicks, but if he gets it to the clinch and Catone can't take him down, Catone's going to take some serious punishment. So that is a big concern for me. So while I do think that Catone has his ways to win, especially if he can get Watson on his back, and Watson is a bit of a fish out of the water when he's on his back, although his submission defense is okay. But if Watson can keep it upright, I think Watson should be able to either outpoint it or, doctor stoppage type of situation. So I'm slightly leaning Watson. Now moving on, we have a flyweight battle here with Chris Cariaso, a top 10 UFC flyweight with a 15-5 record, taking on late replacement Danny Martinez, who is 17-4 overall. Now, Nick, what's the oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Cariaso minus 280, the comeback on Martinez plus 200. Now, this one is the line that's out of all the ones I opened had the most movement early on. Cariaso is all the way down to minus 145 now, so I overestimated the hype a little bit on Cariaso, and I underestimated Martinez as far as the line goes, for sure. I should have opened it under 2-1, so kind of butchered this one, but as far as the fight goes, I do favor Cariaso a little bit. I think it is going to be a competitive type of fight, so, at 125, I understand why people are coming in on the dog a little bit, especially now after the fact, more so. Martinez is a pretty solid fighter. He's only lost a solid, really good competition, and he's been around the sport a while. He's training with the Alliance, of course, so even though he's making his official UFC debut, of course, he's fought in WEC before. So he's been around. The mainstream fans know who Martinez is. He definitely gets a little bit of respect, as evident in all the action coming in on him early on. Now, that being said, I do expect a very competitive matchup. Most of the flyweight matches are so. But getting into Martinez on the feet, the guy's okay. He's nothing too great to look at. He's got good footwork. He has okay boxing. He's one of these guys that kind of likes to lead with some power, likes to lead with his left hook, and even goes to the body sometimes with his leads. So he's got KO power in his hands, doesn't use his kicking game too often. He looks more so to use his hands to set up some takedowns and get the fight to the floor. That's the type of fighter he is. So he's more another one of these guys that likes to grapple, likes to look for takedowns, grappling-based fighter. He has good defensive grappling. He's a guy that's really hard to submit, decent ground and pound, uses his elbows well, and he's hard to keep down. If you get him on his back, he can scramble up and get top position possibly as well. He is coming in on this fight, into this fight as a late replacement fighter. So you got to kind of, I guess, take that in consideration a little bit. I don't think it's going to matter as much. He's coming from a solid camp, and he is at 125. And a lot of times these lighter weight fighters tend to have a little bit better cardio. So Don't think it's going to be a big issue for Martinez taking this fight on short notice. And, I mean, with his well-rounded skill set, he's definitely going to be able to compete and hang in there with Cariaso. Now, Cariaso, on the other hand, though, man, the guy is nothing but impressive. I mean, he's solid. He's always underrated. I mean, he's had success in the higher weight classes, now dropping down to the proper weight class at 125, which is where he belongs. I mean, he's even a little bit undersized for 125 at times. That's a scary part for him. But I mean, overall, Cariaso on the feet, he's fast, he's got good movement, he throws lots of kicks, especially with his left leg. He loves to fire that left leg off. And he counters well. He has a little bit of power, or a little bit underrated power. So he's fun to watch on the feet. I believe that he's going to have an edge over Martinez on the feet. What he has to watch out for against Martinez is definitely the grappling. Now, Cariaso, solid grappling in his own right. He even has some sneaky good wrestling at times. I mean, he's pretty solid from top to bottom with his fight game on the floor. I mean, if you put him on his back, he does look for subs. He can scramble out well. On top, he has good ground and pound. He's smart. He's one of these just intelligent fighters no matter where the fight takes place. So you know what you're getting with Cariaso. He's another one of these guys that is consistent. Now, I have a problem a lot of times, and I say it, and I've said it before in the podcast, with inconsistent fighters. Cariaso does not fit in that category. He's, in fact, the other extreme. I mean, he's one of these guys that's very consistent. You know what you're getting with him. He comes in and he performs steady, and he performs against high-level competition fairly well as well. So a barn burner of a fight. It should be close, competitive. I'm expecting it to probably hit the cards, but I expect Cariaso to come through with a win here. I do think he's just a little bit better than Martinez at this point, and I think it's going to show. But if Martinez does get a crazy close decision, wouldn't be shocked. I mean, the state of MMA judging, and he possibly could get more top position in this fight. That's a concern. But overall, I do like Cariaso, and I think he should win this fight.
And while Martinez is taking this fight on short notice, when I interviewed him yesterday, one of the things that stood out to me was he had been offered a UFC fight for the Ultimate Fighter 18 finale, and he had to turn it down because he wasn't going to make weight. So ever since then, he's known that another chance to get a short notice opportunity to get into UFC would potentially be available, and that was how he was going to be able to make his UFC debut. So that actually has kept him training and getting into really good shape as if he's getting ready for a fight. So I don't think the short notice is definitely not going to be too much of a factor. Now, what things that could be a factor, of course, is the fact that Martinez hasn't had an actual fight since 2012. So it's been over a year, although he did try to get on the Ultimate Fighter Season 18, but he actually got submitted by eventual finalist Davey Grant in the opening round, or in the second round of the fights to get in the house. So that is a bit of a concern too, although granted it was at bantamweight, which is a step above where he's fighting right now. And I think Martinez is overall pretty solid. He's a leader at Alliance. When the team actually with Dominic Cruz was working the Ultimate Fighter back at Alliance, he was the guy that stayed in charge over there and took control of a lot of the stuff, leading all the workouts and everything. So he's a leader over there. He's a guy that a lot of people look up to. He's got pretty good wrestling, and he's been in there against some tough guys. Jussier da Silva, Joseph Benavidez. He hasn't won those fights. Mark Hominick, he still hasn't won those fights, but he does have big fight experience. So Chris Cariaso is not something that's going to surprise him, I don't think. But Cariaso, while he is 32 years old, so that's a little up there in years, especially for a flyweight, he's actually very quick, very mobile, good footwork, and he uses really solid kicks on the feet. So he almost uses them like a jab at times. They just fire out there, in rapid succession. And he has decent power. I didn't think he had finishing power until his last fight against Yarde Santos, when he just lit him up in the second round as Santos started to fade a little bit. So he actually is showcasing some improving power, and that could be a problem here because Martinez is a little wild on the feet. And while Cariaso does hold his own on the ground, and he's got relatively good takedown defense, he does occasionally have trouble with better wrestlers. So that is potentially a concern here. And with Martinez, he does have solid wrestling. He has knockout power, but most of it actually comes from ground and pound. So most of his damage is going to come if he can get Cariaso to the ground, and then he'll be dropping some punches and elbows. Now, I think Martinez has a chance, but Cariaso just is a little bit better overall, and I think Cariaso probably wins a decision here. So I think the public action is a little misguided. So that'll take us to the final preliminary card fight. We have a lightweight battle between John McDessie, who is 12-2 overall, taking on Alan Patrick, who is 11-0. So Nick, what's the oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
McDessie minus 190, Patrick plus 150. Looking over at the line of $5 right now, it's McDessie minus 165, the comeback plus 145 on Patrick. So basically just got a little bit tighter. I mean, there is two-way support coming in early on the sports books here. A little bit more support early on the Patrick, but overall it's pretty steady, and we are seeing some action get back on McDessie too. So a lot of split opinions out here, but more support will probably come in on McDessie, is what I'm expecting to. And this is another similar spot. I mean, we talked about it a few times on this podcast already. It's your typical striker versus grappler matchup. McDessie being the striker, of course. I mean, he's fantastic on the feet. He's one of the funnest guys and the most technical strikers to watch in all of UFC, in my opinion, especially at 155. I mean, the guy has great footwork. He's got good movement, good fight IQ, good boxing, good kicks, unorthodox kicks. I mean, he has, the kicking background that he can throw spin kicks, head kicks, lead leg side kicks, everything. You don't know which angle he's going to really hit you with. So he's been working diligently on his takedown defense, as proven. I mean, recently he's hard to take down to the floor, and when he does keep it up, I mean, he has a huge edge over most people on the feet. Patrick, on the other hand, is almost the exact opposite. I mean, he continuously looks to take the fight to the floor. I mean, right away off the rip, he just uses that long range and reach he has actually on the feet. That's one thing I should say right off the get-go here. Patrick is going to be the bigger, more physically gifted fighter. I mean, he matches up pretty well with McDessie in those regards. So he's long, he's going to be stronger. He doesn't have that experience factor that McDessie does, but still, I mean, physically he's going to have those advantages, and he's going to look to take the fight to the floor. That's what Patrick does the best. I mean, continuously, like I said, he just comes forward with those long arms, just tries to get a double leg, single leg, and tries to get the fight to the floor. When he does, he has great success, though. He has good ground and pound. He does look to pass and look for positional, even to work his submission game. So even though he only has a couple subs on his resume, Patrick does have a solid and underrated submission game as well. So on the feet, I mean, Patrick coming off that knockout win over Whiteley, that was definitely his biggest win of his career in his UFC debut. Whiteley, a solid fighter, but looking beyond that, I mean, Patrick hasn't really been that impressive. I know in Brazil he's fought, I guess, some mediocre competition, but in good organizations. But still, I mean, UFC is a whole nother level. So Patrick is going to get the stern test in McDessie. But honestly, I like the way Patrick matches up with McDessie. I think that people are going to be surprised. But Patrick, with his continuous aggression and looking for the takedowns, he's going to eventually, I think, get McDessie on the ground at some point. And when he does, he's going to have success. I think he can hold McDessie there, land a little bit of ground and pound, possibly even take his back. So I think McDessie's biggest kryptonite is still his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His takedown defense did get a little bit better, but if you get him to the ground and you're able to control him, that's where he's going to lose the fight, and I think that's what Patrick does best. So I'm going to pick Patrick actually to pull off this upset. I just think it's going to be a back-and-forth fight. McDessie, when it does stay on the feet, he's going to land the cleaner shots. He's going to probably pick Patrick apart, but I do think Patrick is going to be able to get this fight to the floor more times than not and probably grind out a controlling decision win that way.
Well, while Patrick does have a lot of things going for him, he trains with Jacare, and he pursues the takedown. I mean, even in the Whiteley fight in his UFC debut, the first thing he did was immediately take Whiteley down. So he has that going for him. He's got the southpaw, and he does have some power. I can't completely agree with this one. I think McDessie has really started to come into his own. Even though McDessie's a bit undersized as a lightweight, he has added to his game. His takedown defense is definitely improving. It was a liability when he got his first loss of his career against Dennis Hallman, but it is getting better. And I think McDessie has really started to come into his own. You saw in that last fight against Rene Forge, or maybe Forte, he just blistered him before he even got a chance to take the fight to the ground. So that is always a possibility. McDessie is a very, very special type of striker with that Taekwondo background. He can throw all kinds of crazy kicks. He can throw. He's finished a fight with a spinning back fist of all things. He's actually got power when he sits down on his punches and throws something heavy. He can knock you out. So I think that he's a dangerous guy, and as you saw in the Sam Stout fight, Stout tried to take him down repeatedly. Although granted, Stout doesn't have the best wrestling ever, but McDessie was able to defend those and consistently work backwards and pop Stout and pick him apart. So that is something that could happen to Patrick, because while Patrick does have some decent power and he actually does have a capoeira background, so he'll throw some crazy stuff too, I think he's a bit wild, so that leaves a lot of openings for McDessie to potentially take advantage. Now, a couple things else that scare me. I think Patrick, his conditioning is not the best, and this is his U.S. debut, so he's finally leaving Brazil, so the bright lights might get to him a little bit, and he's actually 2 years older than McDessie, and McDessie does have a lot more experience against high-level guys. So I'm going to pick McDessie to probably win a decision, although he might get a late stoppage if Patrick starts to slow down. So my pick is John McDessie here. Now, moving on to the main card, we have a very interesting lightweight bout featuring former WEC champion Jamie Varner coming in with a 21-8-1 overall mark with 2 no contests, taking on Abel Trujillo, who is 11-5 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective here?
My opening line, Varner minus 190, Trujillo plus 150. Some steady action coming on the dog early on, and I understand kind of why. I'm expecting a very competitive type of fight. Varner has definitely the technical edge. I think he's got the technical boxing. He's got the technical ground skill as far as jiu-jitsu goes, as far as pure wrestling goes. But Trujillo, the interesting thing about him is, man, the guy keeps on improving. I mean, he's working with a great camp in the Black Zillions. He's working on his striking. It's getting a little bit faster. It's getting a little bit more effective. And his wrestling is pretty solid. I know he kind of got ragdolled in his fight against Khabib, but that's Khabib right now. I mean, and Khabib right now is, at the top of the food chain when it comes to UFC wrestlers in the weight class at 155. So I don't think you can take that too much to heart. I think Trujillo is going to show up and be even better in this fight, and I think he matches up really interesting with Varner. I think he's the type of fighter that's going to be a little bit more aggressive. He likes to push forward. Varner likes to backpedal and counter at times. So this is going to be a close fight. I've kind of been going back and forth a little bit on this one, to be honest with you, but I got to go with Varner simply because he does have the technical advantage. I think he's got the cleaner hands here, but he did take this fight on a little bit of short notice, so that is a concern, and he has a tendency to fade at times. Where, on the other hand, Trujillo, Trujillo has a tendency to fade as well, but he's one of those guys that could push through and fight aggressively still, even if he gets a little bit tired. So that's going to be an interesting side note here, and the scorecards are as well. I think Varner's more likely to have a finish here, again, because he is more technical. He may be hop on the back, but if it hits the cards, I'd still give Varner the slight edge, but Trujillo could be a live dog when it comes to the state of judging. They do like guys that push the pace, and he's going to be that type of aggressive fighter. So Trujillo, I'm really impressed with his improvements, but I still got to give the slight edge to Varner in this spot.
Yeah, you brought up the improvements, and Trujillo showed incredible improvement in his last fight. I think all that work with Henry Hoof down at Imperial Athletics with the Black Zillions really helped him out a lot. I mean, he came into that fight against Roger Bowling. He was throwing heavy hooks. He was light on his feet early. He mixed his striking and grappling very well, transitioning from big combinations to takedowns. He throws big knees from every position, whether he's on the ground in side control, he's on the feet when they're in the clinch, when they're against the fence in the middle of the cage. So he's very aggressive. He's just like this kind of whirling buzzsaw a little bit. You get too close to him, you're going to get tagged. So I really do like this new and improved Abel Trujillo. Now, is it going to work against somebody further up the food chain? Because Jamie Varner is legit. I mean, Varner does have a ton of big fight experience. I mean, the former WC champ, he's been in there against the best of the best in the world. He trains at the MMA lab right now, so he's training with some of the best in the world. A thing that scares me, though, he did take this fight on very short notice, about 3 weeks. I'm not sure what kind of fight shape he was in. And even though Varner's 29 and Trujillo's 30, Varner is much older in fight years. You know, Varner's had 32 fights overall. Trujillo's just had about 16 or 17. So I think that's a huge difference. And Varner's, taken a lot of damage over the course of his career. I mean, he had a moment where, he was almost washed up and done when he was just 25 or 26. So, that is a bit of a red flag for me, at least. But overall, Varner does have a big right hand, solid wrestling. Even though he didn't have that huge collegiate wrestling experience, he uses his wrestling well in fights, And Trujillo has shown that he can be out-grappled at times, although Trujillo does scramble back to his feet well. You saw in the Nurmagomedov fight, he just taken down time and time and time again. And Trujillo does not always win scrambles. Sometimes he'll get on bottom, sometimes he'll get stuffed and leave himself in a bad position, so that is a cause of concern. But I just think, look at the career trajectories of these guys. Varner's coming off a tough loss to Gleison Tibau where he just got outworked a little bit, and that does happen in fights. And Trujillo's on a huge upswing, so I'm kind of ride the momentum here, and I'm going to pick Trujillo. Not a ton of confidence, but I think he can get the job done. Now, which side do the numbers kind of agree with here, Reed?
Well, they say that this is a pretty close matchup, and I would agree with that. And fortunately, the line is reasonable. But I am leaning towards Varner on this one, and I believe the difference is in the grappling. And he has been in the cage with some very high-level guys before. He has survived. In some cases, he also got submitted late by Joe Lozon. That was a fight where I was consulting to Joe Lozon, and the game plan on that one was clearly to weather the storm, wear him out, throw some sweeps, and submit him. But I don't see Trujillo running the same game plan. He's a slugger. He's aggressive. In fact, both fighters have striking ratios above 1, so that means they both tend to initiate. So it should be a lot of action, but there's some key stats here. I mean, first of all, Jamie Varner hits very hard for a lightweight. In fact, sometimes he hits too hard and he breaks his hands. But if he doesn't do that, he has dropped 7 guys in his career in WEC and UFC minutes. That's a lot of knockdowns for a lightweight. And here's Trujillo on the other side with a very poor defensive head strike stat. So per exchange, should be Varner being the more technical guy, landing the harder strikes, and then he also has his wrestling as an out. If he gets into trouble, he can use his wrestling. Trujillo's takedown defense stat is pretty bad, but again, it's been mentioned that it's probably skewed because of his fight with Nurmagomedov. So overall, I'm thinking Varner has more ways to win this fight. Whether or not it ends inside the distance is hard to tell. Both guys are tough. But I just see more advantages stacking up on Varner's side.
Excellent. Now, moving on, we have a potential #1 contender match in the flyweight division featuring Brazilian John Lineker, 23-6 overall, taking on Russian Ali Bagautinov, who is 12-2 overall. Now, Nick, where'd you open this one, and how has the public kind of shifted things?
Well, Lineker -115, Bagautinov -125. So Bagautinov is a slight favorite here. And again, pronouncing these names, I apologize for butchering them a little bit. I'll go with Ali, I guess, and Lineker. Ali, the very slight favorite, but basically a pick'em type of fight. And right now, looking over at the line, Ali is still -145. So he's getting a little bit more support from the overall betting public out there. And, man, he's been impressive. You got to admit, he's looked great. Even in his last fight against Tim Elliott, I mean, against a very solid grinding type of fighter that's aggressive, he managed to keep the fight up, counter-strike very well, and show what he's made of. And against a very solid game, ranked Tim Elliott. So I think that really elevated his stock to another level. I think Lineker, when you're looking at him, he's had some impressive performances, especially recently. But there's always question marks about his conditioning. And I think that if this fight goes, the longer this fight goes, it should have actually an advantage for Ali in that spot, and I think a lot of people are feeling that way as well. And at least counterpunching could give Lineker some problems. If there's any flaws in Lineker's game, his strike defense tends to be a little bit weak because he does get tagged. Now, he does have a very solid chin. He's tough as nails, and he's so aggressive that he tends to leave a little bit of openings there. But, I mean, overall, I actually give the advantage to Lineker on the feet. Both these guys are tremendous strikers, especially for flyweight. They have a lot of power. They're fast. They get, like I said, very aggressive. Lineker being the more aggressive fighter, he's going to be the one pushing forward, I think, more times than not. He's got to be careful, though, because Ali's such a great counter-striker, and with that power, he can get some trouble, like I mentioned. As far as the ground game goes, I think that they're kind of going to neutralize each other out or go back and forth. I think Lineker can get top position. I think Ali can counter and get on top as well. So this fight's probably going to play out on the feet, maybe up against the cage a little bit, maybe some on the ground. It's going to be a true MMA fight against two definitely of the top contenders at 125, so it should be a heck of a fight. And again, a true pick'em type of fight. But where the line is now, I have to lean a little bit slightly towards Lineker. I think, he's got a little bit more intangibles, and I think he's going to be bringing the pace to Bagautinov, and I think that that's going to be ultimately the decision here. If it goes to the cards, I think Lineker's pace could get him the nod when Ali's counterpunching skills might not. So expecting a war, both these guys could also land and clip each other because they have so much knockout power and potential. But I have to side with Lineker, especially at a pick-em price. You're getting a little bit of a dog price. I'm going to go that way.
Yeah, looking at this fight, I think that both guys match up actually very well on the feet. Lineker is a little more wild, but I think he's got more power overall. I mean, he's got devastating power. And the problem with Lineker sometimes is he'll eat one to land a big shot. And I think Bagautinov is the type of guy that could really make him pay there, because Lineker does not have great striking defense, but he does mix up his attack very well. So I think he mixes up his attack much better than Bagautinov does. You know, he'll land really good leg kicks. He throws to the body well, and and of course he's got just the huge overall power. I mean, he's hurt guys and finished guys with body shots. He's finished them with punches to the head. So he's very dangerous. But the difference here is I think he does diversify his attack a little more. Bagautinov, he really only wants to box, although he will throw knees if they're in a close clinch situation. You know, he'll pull the head down and try to blast you a little bit, but more often than not, Bagautinov just wants to throw strikes, and usually just to the head too. So it'll be interesting to see the dynamic here. Now Lineker has he's got the weight issues. That's something that's you can't talk about John Lineker without talking about the weight issues. The guy has missed weight in 3 of his 5 UFC fights. That's terrible. They're trying to build him up as a title contender. He's won 4 straight, but if he can't make weight, then what's the point? And I think he's going to make weight for this fight, but that's another thing. You really can't make the overall decision until you see him on the scales on Fight Night, just because he's the guy that there's nobody else in history that has missed weight like he has in his promotions career without getting fired. Now you look at Bagautinov. He's got excellent cardio. He won the decision in his last fight, and before that he got the 3rd round stoppage. So he can go for all 3 rounds no problem. He's spent a little bit of training at Jackson's for this with his countryman Kabalov. So that'll be interesting to see how that's really helping him along. He's on an 11-fight win streak, and I think what I really like about Bagautinov is he's very composed. He does not get rattled in there. He has no problem fighting from the outside. He throws short combinations, but one thing that does scare me a little bit is he can be controlled if taken down, although I'm not sure Lineker's the guy that can exploit that. That might be a little further up the food chain. But I do think that since this fight is probably just going to stay on the feet, the diversity of Lineker's game is going to play a factor, and I think the way that he mixes it up and the big power that he throws is potentially going to at least win a decision on the judges' scorecard. The only cause for concern is, maybe Lineker leaves himself exposed out there and gets blasted because he is a little wild and does not have great defense. So that's my concern, but I am picking Lineker, and I think he pulls this one off. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us?
Well, I'm going to agree with you guys. I'm leaning Lineker as well, and I have plenty of data on him. I don't have as much on Ali. But I will say that Lineker's data prove what we think about him. The guy hits like a truck. At flyweight, it's remarkable. He has a ridiculous knockdown rate. He's already dropped 6 people, or at least scored 6 knockdowns. And he's done so, he's been accurate and with a high pace, which is very hard to do. Normally you see guys who are accurate strikers being counter strikers. This guy has been very accurate and has been pressing the pace, which is a strong combination in a striker. So overall, he is very dangerous, and that pace issue, of course, usually helps him win rounds. As he moves up to better competition, tougher competition, that's going to help him win rounds if he doesn't get that knockout. So I'm leaning Lineker's way. Ali, clearly he's a dangerous guy. He's already had a couple wins. He did it against Tim Elliott, who really outsized him, was able to get a decision win there. Obviously this guy's game, he'll be a little bit smaller in this one, not as much of an issue. But considering how good in striking both these guys are, another option to keep an eye on is the under, because usually flyweights are going to have a 2.5 round under. If that's anywhere near close, even, I think there's value on the under, because both these guys hit very hard, and someone could easily get clipped, as you guys say. But in terms of a straight up, I think it's a very close matchup. I don't have as much visibility into Ali, but I do see very dangerous skill metrics on Lineker, so I'm going to lean with the underdog in this one.
All right, excellent. Now moving on, we have a really big matchup here in the heavyweight division between two guys that were at the top of the division, but they're on their way down a little bit. We've got Frank Mir, former champion, who's 16-8 overall, taking on the former K1 Strikeforce and Dream champion, Alistair Overeem, who is 36-13 with 1 no contest overall. Now, Nick, what's the oddsmaker's perspective here?
Overeem opens minus 285. The comeback on Mir plus 205. And again, looking over to 5 dimes right now, Overeem is minus 340. So more support coming in on Overeem. Both of these guys get obviously some decent respect. They've both been involved in big fights throughout their careers. So popular fighters, and I'm expecting a lot of action for the sportsbooks on this one. I can't really blame the people taking Overeem early on, though, in this spot. I know we'll end up getting some serious action back, I guarantee, on Frank Mir at some point for the sportsbooks that is out there. But in this spot, I do think the early action is probably right. Overeem, stylistically, is kind of a difficult matchup for Mir. I think Mir, if you look at it on the feet, he's pretty solid for a heavyweight. I mean, he has good hands. He mixes things up well. I mean, he displayed even a good kicking game against Daniel Cormier, decent knees. He's just a smart overall fighter. I mean, Mir's been in the game for so long. He's developed from just a ground fighter to an overall complete MMA fighter, I think. So he's dangerous everywhere. But the problem with Mir is his advantage against Overeem is probably going to come on the floor. And Overeem's takedown defense is good enough where he's going to be able to maintain the fight on the feet, and he's going to be able to, again, kind of push the pace. He's got the reach and size advantage over Mir. I think pure kickboxing, you got to give a sizable advantage to Overeem. I think he's more dangerous for sure. He's got a nasty clinch game, but not just that. I think that Overeem's smart enough, especially coming off of back-to-back, upsets, KO losses, really. He's going to push the pace. I think he's going to pin Mir against the cage and kind of try to tee off like many fighters successfully do against Frank Mir. I think that from that position, Overeem against the cage, I mean, his knees are as devastating as anybody. His knees, elbow, clinch work. So that's where Mir does have a tendency to fold and usually get beat. And I think it's going to be kind of another scenario here. I know everybody's pretty much saying that, I mean, this is it. The loser's probably going to be cut, and I think that is going to be Frank Mir. I mean, I'm sure he's going to stick around in some way with the UFC, but I don't think he's going to continue to fight after, the KO loss that Overeem's probably going to put on him. So hard not to go with Overeem here. I know this is a heavyweight fight, and Mir can definitely catch him, or maybe even outlast him if Mir can hang on possibly into round 3 or so. He could win this fight, no doubt about it, but I got to go with Overeem here, and I'm pretty confident he should get the stoppage.
Looking at this fight, it's a little interesting to me. Both guys about the same age, both guys have equally bad chins, but the big difference is striking and power. Mir does have some power, but as an athlete, he is just a little slower, more plodding, and as intelligent of a fighter as he is, that doesn't stop him from repeatedly getting put in the same bad positions over and over and over again in fights. We just see it, as he knows that he doesn't want to get his back pressed against the fence and just pounded on in fights like against Daniel Cormier and Shane Carwin and Josh Barnett, but he still ends up getting put there just because I just don't think he has the same physical tools as some of these other heavyweights. And Alistair Overeem is big enough, he is powerful enough to potentially maneuver Frank over there. And even if he doesn't, I think Overeem, being the former K1 kickboxing champion, the guy clearly knows what he's doing. He's got great technical skill on the feet. He doesn't have amazing cardio, but in a fight against a guy that wilts the way that Frank Mir wilts when he is put under a lot of pressure from big shots, then that might be all you need. Overeem wasn't able to finish Travis Brown, but I think against a guy like Frank Mir, if he hits Frank Mir with those exact same shots that he hit Travis Brown with, Mir is going to fold. And Mir's basically only chance is to just survive, kind of like what Reed was talking about earlier with Lauzon against Jamie Varner. Survive early, and then when Overeem's conditioning fails him, maybe he can take over late. So there is a possibility for Mir, because obviously Overeem does not have a great chin either. He's been knocked out twice in a row here, but I'm really leaning on Overeem to get a quick stoppage here. So I like Overeem to win. And Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, these guys are both heavy hitters, and they both happen to have terrible head strike defense and poor chin. So you're right on all accounts, and to me that says I may be picking Overeem as the more likely guy to land the early strikes and land the more dangerous strikes in the first round. But either one of them could get clipped and dropped. So when you're thinking about bets here, looking at round one or the under, that's definitely probably the way it's going to go. Now, so Overeem's striking accuracy is very, very good. His takedown defense is very, very, very good. So those two things together do mitigate some of the weapons that Mir might have. So it doesn't look good for Mir. I can understand why the betting line has gone through the roof, although I think most people are probably just thinking, hey, Overeem is a knockout artist, he's going to come in. But you guys hit on the key theme here. The guys who survived the storm, like Travis Brown, really Travis Brown, way more durable than Frank Mir. Antonio Silva actually proving to be a little more durable than maybe we thought he was after he went 5 rounds with Mark Hunt. So Frank Mir is not going to have the ability to do that. He's not going to take as much damage before a flash knockdown, and really that's all it takes, as we've seen with his fight against Josh Barnett. So I am leaning Overeem on this one. I'm also looking for probably an early finish.
All right, excellent. Now, moving on to the co-main event, we've got the title on the line, the featherweight title. Jose Aldo, the champion, 23-1 overall, taking on Ricardo Lamas, who is 13-2 overall. So, Nick, what's the oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Jose Aldo minus 600 to come back on Lamas plus 400, and it's staying pretty steady here at $5 right now. It's minus 650 plus 475. I'm looking across the screen. It's about minus 600, 650 or so, anywhere between 700 out there. And, you know, the sportsbooks are obviously going to get bet on Aldo as far as parlays go, and I'm sure we're going to get some straight action back on Lamas at some point. But this is a difficult fight to bet because where the number's at. But as far as a pick goes, it's kind of an easy one to pick, I would think, obviously, with Aldo being that much of a favorite. He is so for a reason. I mean, the guy outside of George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, I mean, look at the run he's been on. I mean, outstanding. He's beat everybody that they've thrown in front of him. I mean, he's got a very impressive resume, including the likes of Mendez, Edgar, Florian. I mean, he beat Uriah Faber. Obviously, Faber dropped down since then. But still, I mean, the guy's beat quality opposition, and he's made some of these guys look bad. Lamas is not going to throw anything that he hasn't seen at him. I mean, I do respect Lamas' overall game. He's a very solid fighter, and he's going to beat most at the 145-pound division, no doubt about it. That's why he got this shot. He is that good. He's got good boxing. He's got good grappling. He's solid wrestling base, good jiu-jitsu skills. I mean, recently actually achieving his black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So the guy's definitely game, and what he can do is actually push a tough pace and make life a little bit interesting for Aldo. But the problem is with Lamas, his kryptonite is his chin. I mean, he's been knocked down and clipped before in the past, and he is now facing one of the most devastating strikers in the UFC and in the history of the UFC. Aldo is just nasty with that power, with his knees, with his elbows, with his leg kicks. I mean, it's just a bad formula for Lamas because he's going to need to get this fight on the floor, and Aldo's takedown defense is excellent. So I think especially early on, Lamas is going to struggle severely to get Aldo down to the floor. He's going to hang in there and do okay on the feet for a little while, but then Aldo's going to start catching him, and that's not going to be a good sign for Lamas. So I think Aldo wins this pretty early. In round 1, round 2, he gets Lamas out of there. But again, this is another key for Lamas. If he can somehow survive the first couple rounds, maybe even round 3, round 4, round 5, and stay in there, he could possibly start winning the fight. I think Aldo, as evident in his last few performances, he does tend to slow down a little bit as the fight goes on, so that it could be a flaw that we see in the champ's game. But still, I mean, it's going to be hard to win 3 rounds against Jose Aldo, no doubt about it. So I think Aldo retains his title, and Lamas, unfortunately, isn't the guy to dethrone him.
Yeah, and you know, I respect Ricardo Lamas. I mean, the guy beat a trio of nasty featherweights to earn this opportunity. I mean, he beat Hato Hiyoki, Cub Swanson, and Eric Koch, and he finished 2 of them. I mean, that's amazing to me. So he's unbeaten in his UFC career, if you throw in the nasty head kick finish of Mac Rice. So, I mean, the guy clearly deserves this shot, but you just look at the matchup, and it doesn't look good. I mean, obviously we know what Aldo does. He's 27 years old. He's got great combinations that he caps off with some of the best leg kicks in MMA history. He's just got brutal power. He's incredibly explosive. He's diverse. he uses subtle head movement to avoid all kinds of punches, so he's not wasting a lot of energy. He's got great takedown defense. So, he's got all these things going for him. Lamas, I'm just not sure how well he stacks up here, because he does like to initiate takedowns. He goes for them often, but his wrestling just isn't on that same level as guys that have tried and failed to take down Aldo. You look at Chad Mendes. Mendes could not get Aldo down, and I think Mendes is a significantly better wrestler than Lamas. Once Lamas gets people down, yeah, they're in trouble. I mean, he lands brutal ground and pound. The Eric Koch fight absolutely was downright nasty, but I just don't see him getting Aldo down unless it's the fifth round of the fight and Aldo's exhausted. So in terms of stand-up, I think Lamas actually does have decent stand-up. It's not great, but what he does have solid are his kicks. His punching is really not that impressive to me. He throws a little too looping, but with his kicks, I think he throws some pretty good leg kicks. Not the power of Aldo, but they're accurate and quick and tough to avoid. He has a nasty head kick that he can swing up there. He's very flexible, but the flashy stuff that he likes to throw, the capoeira stuff, the spinning stuff, that never lands. So it's kind of just wasted energy to me. I've never seen him connect with anything really flashy other than that head kick on Matt Grice, which he can snap out there pretty quick. But the spinning stuff is kind of a waste of energy. So I don't think that he can connect there. And as you mentioned, Nick, the bad chin, he got knocked out by Yuri Alcantara when he was a lightweight. Alcantara right now is a bantamweight. So that does really scare me. And you look at some other opportunities, Danny Castillo knocked him out, and I just think that if Aldo connects with something big, then Lamas is going to go down. He just hasn't been hit yet because his defense has improved a little bit over in his UFC stint, but I just don't see him being able to hang with Jose Aldo. So, Aldo might have that injury prone, and he might not be active all the time, but he's so good that I just don't see Lamas being the guy to dethrone him. So I'm going Jose Aldo. And Nick, or Reed, do the numbers back us up?
Yep, the numbers back you guys up. When I first put together an Uber tail of the tape for this one, it was pretty startling how many check marks were on one side of the page and not the other. So Jose Aldo really he gets the edge in so many different variables. His striking is devastating. He scored lots and lots of knockdowns. He has a good punch-for-punch knockdown rate. That is actually one of the few metrics where Ricardo is slightly higher. Just on a punch-for-punch basis, he did score his knockdowns with slightly fewer strikes, which is great. But you look at the rest of the card, you don't see Jose Aldo getting hit very often. His head strike defense is tied for best in the entire division with Chad Mendes. He is very, very hard to hit, and he establishes his range. He uses it properly. He's accurate, but he's also powerful, and he maintains the right pace. So you don't see him getting put on his back nearly ever. We did see it at the very end of his fight with Mark Hominick, and I think he did have pneumonia at that point. So cut him some slack for gassing out in round 5. So this is one where you have Ricardo's only way to win the fight is to land something extremely powerful. That one punch or one head kick type devastating blow that can really put you on the ropes. And Aldo has proven to be not only durable but to just be so elusive that he's hard to hit. So the stats do align in favor. The current betting line is pretty juicy for Aldo. That's a lot to pay for what looks like a strong prediction that he should win. But keep in mind, Lamas, if he goes back and forth and he plays a smart game, he might be a little bit more durable than we might be giving him credit for when he fought in a higher weight class. Some over-unders might be interesting. I think that's a lot more reasonable of a line, but I also see Aldo as being very good parlay fodder. So it is a pretty clean pick in terms of champions defending their belts. It happens most of the time. So let's not get too crazy when we start seeing the commercials and seeing the challenger come in that he has a chance. This should be an Aldo win.
All right, excellent. Now let's move on to the main event. The former interim champion, now he's the UFC bantamweight champion, Renan Barao, 33-1, taking on Uriah Faber, who is 30-6 overall. So Nick, this is a big one, so where'd you open it, and how has the public kind of shifted things?
Well, Barao minus 270, the comeback on Faber plus 190, and another spot that's actually staying still and firm here because it did get a little bit of movement back and forth early on, but right now looking over 5 dimes, it's exactly minus 270. The comeback on Faber tightened up a little bit now. It's plus 230 though, so a little bit of a tighter margin, and it'll get, as we get closer to fight day, even tighter as far as the line goes. That being said, it's kind of another difficult, tricky fight to bet. I think that we're going to continue to see more support on Uriah Faber out there because a lot of people believe that he's got a legit shot at pulling this fight off, especially due to his recent performances. I mean, the guy's been at the top of the food chain in the WEC. Obviously, he was WEC champ, but not just that. I mean, in UFC, he's done tremendous. He's done really well outside of his title fights. 2 losses as far as title fights go in the UFC, so you can't blame him there. I mean, they were against Barao and Cruz, so 2 of the best. So anybody besides the best, a lot of people are saying this out there, and it's true. I mean, he tends to beat, but again, he's facing one of the guys that more recently beat him in Barao, and I think stylistically it is a difficult matchup for him. I mean, I am going to give Faber a lot of credit because especially in his last fight with McDonald, he looked tremendous. I mean, I honestly thought if it stayed on the feet, McDonald would have a significant edge, especially how long of a career Faber's had at this point. I figured that, he might be coming on basically some kind of decline, but he's looked great. I mean, his striking actually looked much improved in the McDonald fight, and he's always had solid striking, but his aggression, I should say, more than anything else. I mean, he was pinpoint accuracy, did what he had to do in that fight. So you got to give him credit for that because he's beating young guns that are coming, climbing up the ladder or coming into title contention. And you have to respect that. Alcantara is another guy. He might not be a young gun, but he was definitely a guy that's a dangerous fight. And Faber passed that fight with flying colors. So he's looked great. But I think Barao, again, he's the type of fighter that obviously in the first fight, he outpointed him on the feet significantly. I don't think it was even really that close. Barao dictated the tempo of the fight. He was the aggressor of the fight. He landed the cleaner punches in that fight. And I think he could basically follow the same formula. Faber had trouble taking the fight to the floor. Even if you do get Barao to the floor, that's no easy task at all. I mean, his submission game's legit. I know Faber brings a great submission game to the table as well, but I think that part will kind of neutralize each other out there. And Faber tends to get top position, but I think Barao will scramble up and out if he is put on his back just fine. I have no real concern there. And I think, again, he's going to be another fighter that is going to be able to keep the fight on the feet, dictate where the fight takes place. He's going to be pushing Faber back. He's going to be landing those nasty leg kicks. And his hands are just a little bit better. He's a little bit longer. He's a little bit more powerful when it comes to striking game. So I think it will be a very competitive fight, actually a little bit more competitive, I think, than the first time, because Faber is at a good mental state right now. He's got a lot of confidence coming into this fight, and I do believe he's going to be a little bit more aggressive. So if that's the case, it's going to be a close competitive decision, but I believe Barao's still the better fighter, and he's still going to come out on top. So I'm not even going to say it's concerning. I'm going to confidently pick Barao in this fight because I do believe he is the better fighter and he should come through.
Yeah, I think we did underestimate Faber a little bit the last time, and while he is better, I'm just not sure that he's gotten to that point where he's better than Renan Barao. I don't think he'll ever get to that point. Renan Barao is 8 years younger than him. He is so good overall. You see how solid he is on the ground, but it's the improvements on the feet that has really impressed me. In his last fight, he had that spinning back kick that blasted Eddie Wineland right in the face, and he dropped Brad Pickett a couple times before finishing him on the ground. So he's really evolving overall as a mixed martial artist, and he's had a decent amount of time off to really work on things, and training with Jose Aldo, man, iron sharpens iron. This kid is only going to get better at an almost exponential rate, and as good as Uriah Faber has stayed, I'm just not sure how much better he can get to the point where he can beat Renan Barao. In their last fight, it was one-sided. Maybe Faber did have that rib injury and whatever, but I'm just not sure that it'll be enough here, even if he doesn't get hurt early. Faber does have the huge fight experience, but this is a short turnaround for him. He took this fight on like 3.5 weeks' notice when Dominic Cruz went down with an injury. I know that it won't affect him quite as bad as other people just because he's always staying in tremendous shape, but that is another concern. And he mauls everyone in the non-title bouts, but in the last 4 or 5 years, he just has not looked the same in his title fights. Something goes wrong a little bit, and that's scary to me a little bit. And while he does have decent top control against the really great fighters, he usually will just try to get the takedowns and stay in their guard and not do anything crazy, like in the Eddie Wineland fight or the first round of the Michael McDonald fight. He got stood up because he wasn't being active enough. When he gets the big guillotines and the submissions, it's usually after a really big scramble, or he wears his opponent down with ground and pound, or he hurts him standing. So I really don't see him being able to take advantage of anything on the ground against Barao, because I think Barao is better than him on the ground overall. While I do see Faber's stand-up improving, his movement was great in his last fight. He was able to get in, get off the first shot against Michael McDonald, and then be out of the way to dodge the counters from McDonald. So he did look really sharp. McDonald was swinging at air most of the time whenever he threw punches. So I do think that Faber's movement is a lot better, but I can't get in and truly be a believer here that he'll be able to pull it off against Barao. So my pick is Barao. I think Barao probably wins a decision. I think the leg kicks will be a big factor. As much as Faber wants to learn and try to stop him, those have been his kryptonite when he's faced these guys in the past, and I think that they'll continue to be a problem. So my pick is Barao, and I think he probably wins a decision. So Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the tail of the tape, or at least the story, the box score from their first fight, really is what stands out on the stat line, and that is that they're fairly evenly matched in striking. It's just a pace issue. Barao has a tendency to really outwork his opponents. He controls the cage. Faber historically has been a counter striker. He's explosive, he's fast, and he's good, and he does have power, but not being able to keep up pace with his opponents is a bad thing. And that's what lost him that fight. You look back at the numbers, and Barao just overwhelmed him. The numbers, just round after round, he was really, really outpointing him. All up, right up until the fifth round. And then I think on 2 out of 3 judges' scorecards, Faber stole it in the final round. And that's when I think the overall pace of the fight slowed down enough where Faber could get some of that timing down and really get involved. But he was 0 for 6 on takedowns, and I think that was kind of a wasted effort on his part. So I'm looking at this fight, and I do think Faber is coming in with a lot of confidence. I do think maybe his striking has improved. He's gotten some confidence there, and he's not relying on his wrestling the same way he used to, and that's, I think, true for a lot of the fighters over at Team Alpha Male with the bang effect. So maybe he's a little more game this time. So if he keeps pace, he certainly could make this a very competitive fight. Now, at these lines, I'm still leaning Barao straight up. I do think he will still tend to outpace and outwork Faber, but I think Faber is a little more live here than we realize. Again, I'm like you guys. I can't bring myself to pick such a big upset when these guys have faced off before, and Faber just keeps getting older. But I do think if it goes 5 rounds, there might be a couple of rounds that are stolen for Faber. And it's interesting. I took a peek at what the props are on a split decision in Faber's way, and that's over 10-1 or almost 10-1 for a Faber split decision, whereas Barao by split decision is over 7-1, which is very interesting. A Barao by split decision is not a crazy idea. This reminds me of the Ben Henderson and Josh Thompson fight. It was a lot closer on paper than people were giving them credit for, and that results in a couple rounds going the other way by different judges, and a split decision is entirely possible. So again, both these guys are going to be very tough to finish. As we've said before, the high-level talent, these guys are hard to finish. So I'm leaning Barao straight up. I do think that Faber is a little bit maybe underappreciated here, but we'll see where the lines go. And I do think it's probably going to take the full 5 rounds.
Thanks, Reed. So that does it for our complete UFC 169 event breakdown. Make sure to check out part 2 of the Premium Oddscast soon, where we'll reveal our premium bets for the event. Those bets can only be accessed before the event if you're a member of MMA Oddsbreaker Premium, so make sure to sign up if you want to cash in. Also, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter, which is where we will reveal our free bet for UFC 169 shortly after the weigh-ins, if we do indeed have one. You can also gain access to the free plays via our email service. Just send an email to picks@MMAoddsbreaker.com if you'd like to gain access to our emailing list. You may also want to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page for all the latest updates from the show. Special thanks to our sponsor 5Dimes, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for UFC Fight Night 36 breakdown. Good luck everyone, and may the betting gods ever smile upon you.